Geeks and geekettes, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, my dominant herons, senores and senoritas. Welcome to another fabulous, thrill packed, information soaked episode of Ask Chuck Dixon. It's a very special episode of Ask Chuck Dixon. No, nobody dies or gets married or has a baby, but I'm handing this episode over to Christopher Cohen. We're calling it Christopher Cohen Investigates. He just sent me just a whole email packed with awesome questions. And Christopher Cohen, for reasons I can't really reveal, he's just a personal hero to me. He's done things that he doesn't want to brag about, and I can't tell you about. But he's a man I respect. I can't say I know him, but I respect him. What I know about him, I like. Anyway, he's got some terrific questions here. And we're going to start off with, while you prefer to avoid scripting accents mentioned in episode number 230, do you make an effort to research and try to include slang that is commonly used in regions you choose your characters to originate from? I try to stay away from slang, but there's certain phrasing in different regions. There's certain ways of saying things. There's certain ways of referring to things. I mean, my dad grew up in the South, and he bought insurance, not insurance. We stayed at a motel. And that it was the police. So you know, now those are accent things, which I really don't want to put into a story in either prose or comic. But he would have certain phrasing, certain things he said, and that's the thing. As a writer, you kind of got to listen and take stuff in, and especially if you travel or if you meet people at events that are from different parts of the world, different parts of the country, and just sort of pay attention. Just keep your ears open. I always use the example of standing in the checkout line at Target. I'm kind of listening to the people in front of me, the conversation they're having. I'm not interested in their lives or anything else. I just want to hear how they talk. And and a lot of phrasing and stuff. I mean, I'm fascinated with phrasing that comes from other places. It's in English, but it comes from somewhere else. I'll get into that in more detail in just a moment. But you want to, I'm not big on the regional accents and everything else. You don't want somebody from Brooklyn, with the D's, them, and does. You don't want somebody from the South going, there's a fire in that house. Boston, I parked my car in the yard. You don't want to do that in dialogue. But phrasing can inform you where a person's from. It's like people from Brooklyn and the outer boroughs. They have not for nothing, and they'll say not for nothing, and then they'll follow it with it's basically like with all due respect. It's the Brooklyn version of with all due respect, except it's more meaner. And it's not for nothing, but you're a moron. And so it's like, excuse me for saying this, but you're a simpleton. You're the dumbest person I've ever met. So you got, and there's all kinds of phrasing like that. And I've often mentioned the TV show Mayor of Easton, which was set in Delaware County. And I grew up in Delaware County, Pennsylvania. And my wife and I are just jaw drop at Kate Winslet's ability to do accents from anywhere. She can do any American accent. And she nails the Delco accent perfectly. And the writers obviously were from Delco because they put in phrasing, the kind of phrasing I'm talking about, where characters would end a sentence with "and all." Now, where does "and all" come from? It doesn't mean anything. And the thing is, I didn't even realize that I did that, until my wife kept pointing it out. Why do you say "and all" at the end of sentences? Almost like etc. You just end your sentence with, yeah, we went to we went shopping, and then we, stopped by the driving range and all. And I don't even realize I do it. And the writers on the show did that. They put in "and all." But other like Philadelphia phrases that I remember from my grandmother were, if someone she didn't respect, or whose opinion didn't matter to her, she would just say, well, they're from 6th and Jabip. And I don't know where 6th and Jabip is, but apparently it was a neighborhood full of people not worth paying attention to. Another great phrase, Philadelphia phrase, is if you park your car too far from an event, from the stadium or the shopping mall, um, you refer to it as, I parked my car back where Christ left his sandals. Uh, so things like that, phrasing like that, you really need to pay attention to, rather than slang. Avoid slang at all costs, because, you know, as I kindly refer to myself as late middle age. Uh, by the time I hear slang, it's already 6 months old. It's over by the time I hear it. So I don't want to be using it, and I probably use it incorrectly anyway. The only time you want to use slang is if you're doing a period thing that's definitely set in the 1940s or 1950s. That's fun. Going back and doing more arcane slang. People in the 50s saying that's George instead of that's cool. I mean, where did that come from? But like I said, just keep your ears open as a writer. That's what you got to do, and just listen to people talk, and sort of file it back in your head. And then when the thing is, I mean, if I were writing this, I would have more articulate examples, but I'm not using the writing part of my brain. I'm using the speaking part of my brain. The weird thing is when I go to write, I'll remember all this stuff. If I have a person who's from Alabama or a person who's from Texas, I'll remember all the people that I met from those regions and things they might have said. I'll remember kind of how they talk. I can hear it in my head. Their phrasing. So, and science bears me out. We have different parts of our brain specialize in different uses of our language. If it's reading, writing, speaking, listening. So, anyway, there we go. End all. Christopher Cohen again. It's going to be Christopher Cohen all day. On the topic of merging the DC and Marvel universes, also discussed in episode 230, what was your involvement in the intercompany Amalgam line of comics besides writing Bruce Wayne, Agent of S.H.I.E.L.D.? That is, was making Bruce Wayne, Agent of S.H.I.E.L.D. your idea or handed to you by editorial? And did you suggest mergers of any of Amalgam's other titles? Also, are there any DC and Marvel characters you'd like to have seen merged together for the line event that never occurred? Yeah, I mean, this was an editorially driven event from day one, from Jump Street. The editors cooked. I don't know which editor. I don't know who was it. I seem to remember it was Paul Kupperberg, but I don't really know who was at the center of this. It was one editor at the core running this 1 month event. If you don't know what it was well, obviously there had to be somebody at Marvel as well. Maybe this was cooked up by Tom Levitz and Tom DeFalco, over dinner at a convention. This was a 1 month event, and it just sort of put Marvel and DC Universe into a blender and then see what comes out. And everything had to be combined versions of a Marvel and DC character, iconic Marvel and DC character. So you get Bat Thing instead of Man Bat and Man Thing, and which was one of my favorites. So and then the rules were each story had to be 50% Marvel, 50% DC references as far as ancillary characters, settings, villains, things like that. So it's a real mishmash. And they also had to be like the middle of an arc. They weren't origin stories. They were like, it was like this parallel universe where DC and Marvel were one, and this is what they would have come up with. But it was all editorial driven. It was handed to us. I was asked, would you want to do Bruce Wayne? You're our first choice for Bruce Wayne, Agent of S.H.I.E.L.D. Do you want to do it? I'm like, yeah, that sounds like fun. And it was a lot of fun to write because, obviously I've been writing Batman for quite a while, and my editors knew I was a big fan of Nick Fury, particularly the Jim Steranko period on Shield. So it was a good fit for me, and just had a lot of fun. But no, I didn't get to suggest anything. This wasn't a round table where they went to the freelancers and said, "What ones would you like to do?" No, they were all laid out ahead of time and handed to us. And then it's like, just take this crazy idea and run with it. And it was kind of liberating not to, just sort of come in the middle of a story, come into the middle of this crazy story, and there's no recap, there's no nothing. You just sort of pretend this is like issue 37, and then you could leave a cliffhanger that you're never going to come back to and resolve. It was kind of a neat writing exercise, and I know they did it a second time. I don't think I was not, well, I know I wasn't invited the second time. I might have been at CrossGen at that time. Not sure. More on that later. Christopher Cohen, once again, regarding your Nightwing run. Did you intend to exit Dick's title when you did? And if so, why? Or was the decision made by editorial, for example, because they needed you to bail them out on other titles? Same for leaving Birds of Prey. Well, the simplest answer is, as I mentioned earlier, CrossGen. I left DC Comics I gave my notice in 2001, actually stopped writing for them in March of 2002. When you went to CrossGen, you signed an exclusive. You couldn't write for anybody else. But I got a special dispensation because I wanted to give DC 6 months notice, and I wanted to complete storylines and arcs and bring my stories to a natural conclusion. And mostly, I wanted to get to Robin 100. I didn't want to fall short of writing Robin 100. So Mark Alessi gave me carte blanche to continue writing for DC, and I guess he asked around, and like, can he handle writing for us and writing for them at the same time? And I think he was assured, yes, Chuck can do that. he will not shirk his duties at CrossGen. He will not fall behind schedule. So basically, I mean, my DC run was interrupted when I moved to the sunny Gulf Coast of Florida, which doesn't look anything like this. It looks more like Long Island. I live 30 minutes from the beach. You know how many times I've been to the beach in the last 5 years? If you guess 0, you win a cookie. So anyway, moved down here to Tampa to work at CrossGen, which swiftly went under, but then I stayed, myself and my family. But my runs ended with Nightwing. Is that 60? I can't see it. Anyway, this was my last issue with Nightwing, my last issue of Birds of Prey, and the aforementioned Robin 100. And the scripts for all of these were written in my office at CrossGen, and the prior 4 issues leading up to these were all written. Basically, I would do CrossGen work all day and then work on DC scripts in the evening before going home. And so there you go. It was me leaving. It wasn't me being asked to rescue. At that point, something like that might have happened earlier on in my career at DC, but at the point where I was at DC Comics at the time, that wasn't going to happen. I was basically being given the cold shoulder by my editors I was working for. I really got the impression that they really hoped that I would leave or get hit by a bus or fall off a building or contract a deadly illness so I could stop writing for DC. But comic book editors, 80% of comic book editors are a cowardly lot, and they didn't have the cojones to fire me, and they didn't have cause to fire me because my books were selling well. They were mid-range sellers, and in Nightwing in particular, Nightwing was a bellwether book at DC. It was the book they looked at to see how the line was doing. Nightwing is how they took the DCU's temperature. Did Nightwing sales go down? Did they go up? What are we doing right? What are we doing wrong? So there you go. That's the story of me leaving DC for Florida. Okay, well, Christopher Cohen asked now, what was there a character title at DC that you wished you had gotten to write a run on that you never got the opportunity at? Yes, Commandi. I wanted to write Commandi. And I pitched, I've told this story before. Um, um, I pitched Commandi as an all ages, a young adult comic series, because I saw the success that Marvel was having with Spider Girl. And Tom DeFalco and Ron Frenz were busting heads. They were kicking ass over at Marvel with these Spider Girl trade paperbacks. It was literally a surprise hit. Marvel did not expect the sales. I mean, the sales were tremendous. Spider Girl trade paperbacks were outselling most of Marvel's monthly titles. I mean, big numbers. They were just, W after W for Tom DeFalco and Ron Frenz, and well deserved. It was a well crafted series, but somehow it got to the attention of tweeny girls. And as I've said often, the key to success for an American comic book is to get girls to read it. If you can get girls to read your comic book, you have increased your circulation, you have increased your sales by magnitudes. And so, Archie Comics lives and breathes and dies on female readership. Let's face it. So I thought, we can do that with Commandi. Because even though Commandi features a boy, literally the last boy on earth, has a lot of appeal for female readers. And it would also have appeal for male readers in the young adult market. And what would be more perfect? The kids, for some reason, love the post-apocalyptic stuff. And here we got a post-apocalyptic Planet of the Apes on acid. I mean, it's Jack Kirby going crazy, and it's this young boy, heroic boy trapped in a world where he's surrounded by talking animals. Talking animals. Young adult. We're talking 10 to 13. I mean, 10 to 13-year-old girls. A cute boy hanging out with talking animals in a post-apocalyptic world. What do I got to do to convince you? Let's start printing the money now. But DC, they literally said they were not interested in the young adult market. This is at the height of Harry Potter. The height. Harry Potter was a publishing phenomenon like no one had ever seen before. And they were not interested in that audience. And as I said before, I'm boring everybody. Darwin Cook had been in the week before me pitching the same idea with Wonder Woman. And they told him the same thing they told me, because they were morons, didn't like money, weren't running the comic company as a business. Same thing was going on at Marvel. Marvel was reaping the benefit of Tom DeFalco and Ron Frenz's excellent work on Spider-Girl, but they didn't like it. They didn't like Spider-Girl. And they didn't like the fact that young girls were reading it. Can you understand this? Because I can't. It was like, it wasn't appealing to their core base fan base. No, it was appealing to a new, much larger fan base. And maybe Spider-Girl's, because Spider-Girl was such a hit, you should have followed it up with more titles to appeal to that audience, but they weren't interested. They actively avoided that audience for comics. I mean, if you can explain that to me, explain it. The only other character I might have wanted to have a run on, but I never made a try, never made an attempt. I knew my pitches wouldn't be welcome, would be Superman. If Graham Nolan and I had been let loose on Superman for a year to do whatever we wanted to do, that would have been a blast. That would have been a lot of fun and challenging. He's not an easy character to write, which evidenced by all the lazy writing we see on him. Writers who somehow don't realize he's difficult to write and just take the easy path. Christopher Cohen, once again, do you recall if the purpose of the Tangent Comics imprint was only ever intended as one-shots or to test the market with the intent of continuing the newly reconceptualized characters if hugely successful, and or expanding it to more DC characters? The Tangent universe is kind of weird. They would take the name of the character, Superman, Flash, whatever, and just do a completely new version, a completely new universe, completely reimagine the character just using the same name. or ensemble group of characters. And this was another entirely editorially driven. Although I kind of remember Dan Jurgens was more. He was like the creator more at the heart of this. I could be wrong about that. My memories are vague on this. I got my marching orders. You're going to write Secret Six, and you and Tom Grummett are going to work together. All I had to hear was Tom Grummett. And I'm like, yes, I like working with Tom Grummett. So off to the races. I think it was, I always say that DC does whatever Marvel just did, but there is one thing DC will do. They will just throw crap at the wall and see what sticks. They will take a chance, or well, once upon a time they did. They will take the risk, and over again, if you look at their history, they've done this. In the '60s, they experimented with different kinds of comics. In the '70s, they did Vertigo, extremely successful experiment for DC Comics. Things like that silly Rush City that I did. It was a comic book done in conjunction with Pontiac, the car company. Stuff like that. They were willing to entertain things like that, and we see it again in the '80s and '90s where they replaced their B-level characters, Green Lantern, Flash, Green Arrow, with new personas. They get rid of the original characters who wore those costumes, and they replaced them with younger versions, hoping to appeal to younger readers. And largely that was a very successful move for them. So things like Amalgam and things like that, and Tangent is like, well, let's just throw it out there and see, because you never know. It's like the Bloodlines annual thing. We did this stunt with where we had to create new characters, basically new characters mutated from alien genetics. In each annual, we just introduced them, and the idea was, let's see which one has legs. The only one that had legs was Hitman, but at least they got Hitman out of it. So at least they were trying. DC was trying. They were spinning the wheel, and because they had participation agreements with creators were willing to present new ideas to them. Unlike at Marvel, where creators were reluctant to present new ideas because they knew they would never have any even small percentage of ownership in anything they created, whereas DC was offering that. So DC in this period was a creative engine going that they eventually stalled out and killed, strangled, and put in a sack and threw in the river. But for a while, they were doing stuff. They were trying to make a difference. They were trying to reach out, trying to reinvent themselves. And this was, I assume, the point of this. This was the effort to see, hey, this new version of Power Girl, or this new version of Nightwing and the Night Force, this new version of Metal Men might actually take off. People might respond to it, and then we'll just do more of it. Because that's the history of comics. Redundant publishing. Horror sells, you do more horror. If horror sales start to flag and cowboy comic book sales start to go up, do more cowboy books. When the cowboy book dies, do more war books, because that's what's selling. When 3D is big, you do 3D till the wheels come off. And that's the history of comics until the 21st century, where they just kept doing the same thing over and over and over again. Go for the same audience. The same audience is shrinking and dying and outgrowing and fading away. And eventually turn that audience off, and God only knows what they do to keep the doors open. I guess the sales of action figures and revenues from the movies. Christopher Cohen, what was it like working for Wildstorm? Did they approach you to write Team 7, or did they advertise they were looking for submissions and you pitched it? If the former, did they provide you with a list of all the intended team members, their backgrounds, etc., or did you have to come up with their mission statement, etc., out of whole cloth? Did you have any other story ideas for the team beyond what was published? Yeah, they kind of reached out to me for Team 7 at first because I knew Jim Lee. I'd met him in the offices a number of times. I remember meeting him when he first showed up at Marvel. Meeting him in Carl Potts's office. I like Jim a lot. He's an interesting guy in the fact that, he made it almost all the way through medical school. This guy was almost a doctor, but decided to, his first love was comics and to go for that. So, obviously very intelligent man. Um, but they gave me Team 7, and I don't know who I was dealing with. I didn't deal with Jim directly, but they told me that Jim wanted me for Team 7 and basically tell the backstory of all of their core characters, Grifter, and I can't even remember the names of the characters. Grifter and Head Strike, and Blood Wound and Toe Jam, all those guys. And they wanted a backstory because they all had a military background that had been implied in their own comics, and they wanted me to go back and tell a story. And I'm like, yeah, I can do that. And they said that Jim chose me because he considered me the Tom Clancy of comics, which I graciously took as a compliment. But even though I didn't feel that way, but yeah, it was Jim Lee's got me in the door there at Wildstorm, and he was the boss. They would hire anybody. If he said, hire the next UPS man who delivers a package to write our next miniseries, well, they would have had to do that. And I think in a couple of cases that is what they did. But so I got to do a number of things, kind of got into their wheelhouse. I did the first Team 7 with Aaron Wiesenfeld, who was just a phenom artist. I did, what did I do there? I did a second series with Chris Warner, where I really dug working with Aaron. I really dug working with Chris Warner. I did a third one, which had beautiful Michael Golden covers, and that's, as my mom said, if you can't say something nice, don't say anything at all. So that's all I'll say about that series. Is, man, it had some kick-ass Michael Golden covers. But then, they reached out years later for me to do Team 0, which was a number of these Wildstorm characters were immortal for, in the way that Wolverine is immortal. Been around a long time. And so they had me do Team 0, World War II, and I did it with Doug Mankey. And I think, I'm pretty sure Drew Geraci did a lot of inks on these. And it was really fun doing it. And it was a story I always wanted to tell, sort of a commando Alistair McLean kind of story that I've always wanted to tell, but never given the opportunity. And then when they said, well, we want this, sort of crazy military adventure thing set during World War II, I thought, I got the perfect story. They raid they're in a race to reach the V2 manufacturing, the rocket manufacturing plants in Peenemund before the Russians get there. And then they run into conflict with Soviet troops. So that was cool. That was a lot of fun to write. I liked working with Doug. Doug's an awesome dude. And they reached out to me for Nightmare on Elm Street when they got the New Line horror comics. I forget. Boy, I want to say it was Scott Peterson. I think Scott Peterson, my former Batman editor, was editor on this. My memory may be failing me on this, but he reached out and said, or maybe it was Ben Abernathy. I can't remember. But one of them reached out and said, we have the New Line things. We have Leatherface. We have whatever the other one was. And we have Nightmare on Elm Street. And I said, Nightmare on Elm Street all day. I want Nightmare on Elm Street. So they gave me that. I did it for 8 issues. And whoever was running Wildstorm at the time thought that my work was too old school, which I'm still not sure what that means. And so they fired me and replaced me with another writer who never handed in a script or never handed in a script that New Line would approve of. New Line approved all of my scripts. I never had notes. And I know the writers on the other 2 titles, and they had tons of notes. They had stuff they had to change all the time. But I understood Freddy Krueger and I understood that world, and I understood the rules and how to play in it. And but got those 8 issues, my friends, and you didn't get any more issues because either the writer didn't hand anything in or didn't hand anything that New Line approved of. And pretty much this is where the wheels come off at Wildstorm for me because Jim Lee was suggesting me, but I don't think they were listening to him anymore. And of course, Jim was involved with DC Comics and distracted. But the last thing I did for them, unless there's some other project I've forgotten, was Grifter Midnighter. And I don't remember a lot about working on this. I did a good job, but mostly what I remember was getting in trouble because my unearned reputation as a homophobe seemed to outrage the LGBT community in comics, the loudmouths. Um, you know, I'm not even saying that gay people were upset by me working on Grifter Midnight, or gay advocates, gay activists, many of whom are straight. Uh, they get angry for gay people because gay people can't emote, they can't express themselves. So we've got to look out for them, poor pitiful creatures that they are. Oh, so I think there was a little outrage that someone had been accused of homophobia so much was writing a gay character, but I didn't care. It's a character. He was interesting. I wrote him. Really didn't care. Uh, but and then Jim Lee and I talked a number of times about doing a Grifter Batman crossover, and I wrote a pitch for it, actually a full outline. And for some reason, Jim wanted it set in the future, so it had like a lot of cyberpunk elements to it. It's kind of like Matrix, meets Blade Runner kind of thing. I'm not quite sure why he wanted it set in the future, but he did. So I came up with a storyline for that, but it just never came together. And Jim was going to draw it, and of course that was the problem. I mean, if they had just assigned it to an artist, it would have gotten done. But Jim really wanted to do it, and of course he was so overbooked between his executive duties at DC and just in demand to do Superman, Batman stuff that we never got to it, sadly. It would have been cool. That's not to say it couldn't happen now, right? We're still working. Christopher Cohen, again. Do you have any good news to report on potential revival of your Law Dog series with Flint Henry? And do you intend to reach out to Gerardo Zaffino about working on a further Winterworld story? Well, if I did bring back Law Dog, it probably wouldn't be with Flint. Flint has taken himself off the board. He doesn't draw comics anymore, sadly. Took too much out of the boy, I guess. I still communicate with Flint, love Flint like a brother, but I respect his decision. Doesn't want to do this anymore. It's not an easy job. But we did some great stuff together, and of course we still co-own it. So if a Law Dog revival went forward with another artist, Flint would see remunerations from that. I would certainly see to that. The company that we were going to do the Law Dog revival through, sadly, just never got off the ground. But I never abandoned ideas for new Law Dog stuff. So, hopefully get back to it someday. Winterworld's another thing. I'd love to work on a Winterworld series with Gerardo Zaffino, or just graphic novels or whatever. Gerardo Zaffino, the son of Jorge Zaffino, who is he's an extraordinarily talented artist in his own right, and just like the Kuberts, Andy and Adam draw like their dad, Gerardo draws like his dad. And Jorge would be very, very proud of his son, how accomplished he is. I'd like to get to this, but IDW currently holds the rights. But we'll see what happens, because I don't think IDW is going to be around much longer. In fact, I'm recording this episode 3 weeks before you're seeing it. IDW may have passed away in the meantime. Not that I wish anybody at IDW ill, but it would free up some IP for me to do with what I want, since they're really not interested in doing anything with it. Christopher Cohen comes back. Do you have concerns about the impact for small independent publishers because of Diamond Comics going into Chapter 11? I.e., ones that aren't selling big enough numbers to consider Random House, etc., distributing them. Yeah, I'm starting to hear about that. You could go to Ingram or whatever and get comics through them. Certainly trade paperbacks and all the rest of it. But apparently you need a good line of credit, a certain amount of capital, and everything else to deal with these, frankly, much larger book distributors than Diamond. Diamond was the biggest name, the only name in comic distribution to the comic shops, but it was by no means the biggest distributor of publications. Ingram could roll over in its sleep and crush Diamond. Big international book distributor, but they're not as forgiving. They're not as understanding about comic shop survival as Diamond was. It's probably the only good thing I can say about Diamond was they were to some degree interested in the survival of the comic shop system, the direct sales system. But let's face it, it's not just Diamond to blame here. You got to blame DC and Marvel too, because whether you like it or not, and whether any of us in the comic book business like it or not, for the longest time, DC and Marvel determined the market. They were the bellwether companies. They were the companies that if DC and Marvel did poorly, everyone else did poorly. If DC and Marvel was going gangbusters, everyone else did gangbusters. DC and Marvel's success or failures either lowered or raised all boats. They were the tide. They were the main force. They were the electromagnetic energy holding the whole comic book industry together. But as DC and Marvel fell, as their sales fell, as their market share overall in comics, this includes book trade comics, shrank to single figures, the comic book market, comic book shops fell with them. And of course, there's no newsstand to speak of. And so who takes the brunt of the hurt? The comic shops, because the comic shops, they're not getting a piece of the movies and the licensing and the tchotchkes and all the rest of it. The TV money. The comic shops aren't seeing the benefit of any of this enormous success, particularly Marvel had up until recently, and DC had their own successes as well. They're not seeing anything from that. They wanted to sell comic books, and of course, they couldn't, sell comic books because nobody wanted the comic books that Marvel and DC were producing. And Marvel and DC's sort of working in conjunction with Diamond to push material on the retailers that they didn't want, they knew they couldn't sell, in order to give them projects that they possibly could make some money on. That hurt all the way around. And of course, the shrinking market, because, the drumbeat, you've heard me say this a million times, because they had abandoned the newsstand, they had lost the entry-level market for comic books. So there were no new fans coming along to boost the comic book stores up. And so what do we end up with? We end up with store after store selling Funko Pops. And you can't really survive selling Funko Pops. And I don't even know the distributors, if you are surviving on Funko Pops, and a number of retailers tell me that they are, at Funko Pops and statues and posters and other tchotchkes and gimcracks and gizmos and whatever other euphemism I can come up with for useless junk. They are surviving selling this crap, not comics. Comics are a tiny little bit of what these comic shops sell. And even the comic shops that try to get into manga, they can't really go into manga all the way. And then they're in competition with Barnes and Noble. It has enormous manga sections. And then your local comic shop can't compete with that. The sheer inventory that Barnes and Noble moves and Amazon moves in the manga arena, they can't compete. So, and the thing is, without Diamond distributing the tchotchkes, I don't know where you go for the tchotchkes. I honestly don't know. Is there an alternative distribution stream for Funko Pops and all these other action figures and high end stuff, the Hot Toy stuff and Sideshow stuff, and all these big companies, NECA, and I can't even remember all the names of the companies that do action figures and specialty items, gift shop items for the distribute through the comic shops, items you don't see anywhere else but a comic shop. Now, I understand you see Funko Pops a little bit at Target and other places, but these specialty items, the Diamond Direct items that were specifically made for comic shops, I don't know, is there an alternative stream for them? Obviously there is, because Target isn't buying Funko Pops from Diamond. They're buying them probably from Funko, I would imagine. but for a small retailer to start reaching out and having all these alternate accounts, and I got to order this from this distributor and that from that distributor and that from that. Now that's like a real store, and each one of those distributors, all of which are larger than Diamond, are going to want you to have a credit line. They're going to look into you. You need capital and everything else. And I really feel sorry for comic shop owners. And apparently, from what I'm hearing, comic shops all over the country are closing. It's like a pandemic of comic shop closings. But what are they supposed to do? I mean, they've been put in this position by Diamond and Marvel and DC, and what are they going to have to do to survive? Sell more candy and sodas? I don't know. And then, if they can't get the items to sell because of whatever reason, they got nothing to sell. The most successful comic book retailers I know right now don't go through any distributor. They only sell back issues. Their distributor is a guy walking in with his granddad's comic collection, and that's their, and they're doing well. I mean, because apparently there's a big market with younger readers for older comics, not the newer comics, but the older comics. I don't know if the retro appeal, or maybe it's just like, you and I, if you're listening to this, just like me, you would haunt used bookstores and places like that to buy used comics and garage sales and, pester your relatives or any comics in the attic. Can I go look? I'm hoping for that find, an amazing find, that treasure trove of golden age comics that we all dream of finding someday. But the biggest problem for the comic shops, for most comic shops, is capital. They're undercapitalized, and this is the way it's always been. By undercapitalized, I mean they don't have any reserve cash, and there's just so far you can go on credit in a small business like a comic shop. And the only comic retailers I know who would make it through the booms and busts, and I know lots of comic book guys who went out of business. The only ones that could stay in it were the ones that had enough reserve cash to weather the bad times, because comics are like the stock market. It's a roller coaster. The sales go up, the sales go down. The market changes. You have good months, you have bad months, you have some really terrible months, and you got to hold on until you get that next big release that everybody wants. You got to wait until, Superman gets married and all, people have never walked in a comic shop are coming in. So, that's the Achilles heel of most comic retailers. And I'm sure if I had a room full of comic retailers who went out of business, they would all tell me, yeah, I just ran out of money. I couldn't pay the rent. I couldn't pay my employees. I couldn't hold on. I had no reserve cash. And that's been the bane of the comic book sales industry, the direct sales industry, among all the other things I listed. So there you go. It's sad. It really is sad, because, as a comic fan, I used to like going in I haven't been in a comic shop in years, but, I liked going into comic shops. I mean, but there's part of the problem, isn't it? Me, a diehard fan, even though an older fan, I have no interest in going to comics. There's nothing there for me anymore. And I can't be alone. And just imagine what guys younger than me, I mean, if you're 40 or if you're even 30, you remember better comics than what they're putting out now. Generally. I mean, there's some good stuff still being put out, but generally, overall, there's nothing to get excited about. Very sad. Very, very sad. Hey, if you're as ambitious as Christopher Cohen and want to bombard me with awesome questions, please feel free to do so at brunobookstore@gmail.com. brunobookstore@gmail.com is the most reliable way to reach me. I check it a whole bunch of times every day. Just obsessed. I'm like Ahab and the whale. I gotta see what's showing up at brunobookstore@gmail.com. What incredible thing, what all-inspiring communication has come across my transom from you fine folks. So that's it for me. Thank you for listening. Thank you for watching. Thank you for Christopher for the terrific questions. And I will see all of you down the road.